world order gonna take all they can take. Deals being done with a Masonic handshake. Wars being fought over oil in the Middle East.
The Hill of Tara, I was up there last summer. I made a rally. I organised a rally, a No World Order celebration, I called it, and all the free men came along. It was a good day. No World Order celebration, right at the, you'd have loved it, right at the Wellington's monument, a big obelisk, basically. And we went up to the Hill of Tara, and Timez, am I pronouncing that correctly? Timez,
yeah.
The Hill of Tara.
Oh, yeah.
This is for the benefit of the listeners, and I've been looking forward to reading this out. Timez, free from feebleness, hides not the glory to women for its building. The daughter of Lugaid obtained in her possession an open plain that it were pity to pillage. The wife of Gede begged a dower from her husband, as I have heard. The clear-hued fortress, stately ascent, keen was the game for graves. The abode was a keep, was a fortress, was a pride, a rampart free from ravage, whereon was to be the grave of T after death, so that it should be an increase to her fame. Eramon the lowly had a wife in the very midst of imprisonment. She got from him all her eager desires. He granted everything she spoke of. Brega T, a teeming home, is famed because T was a noble dame. The funeral mound, under which is the great one of the standards, the burying ground that was not rifled. The daughter of Pharaoh, with tales of warriors, Tefi the bright, who used to cross the hill slope, framed a stronghold. Hardy the labourer, with her staff, framed a stronghold with her staff, and with her brooch she traced it. She gave a name to her fair stronghold, the king's wife, gracious and lovely, the rampart of Tefi, who would affront an army, whence she executed without dread any deed. Not hidden is the secret place, that it should not be spoken of. The rampart of Tefi in the east, as I have heard, in such wise at that place, with no unworthy tradition, did many queens build their sepulchres. The length and breadth of the Tefi, not ignorantly the learned measure, 60 feet in full. Diviners and druids beheld it.
That's right. All these sacred sites, I don't care if you're talking about Navan Fort or the Hill of Tara or Newgrange, are completely dedicated to the goddesses or the queens, as was the whole of Ireland for that matter. And then, Armagh, County Armagh, is Ard Macha, a goddess of the Tuatha Dé Danann, and there's many graves of the queens are up there in Armagh. So there was an incredible emphasis, you see, on the queens and on their rulership, and it was probably quite similar to Egypt, in which the pharaoh could only be pharaoh if the leading princess had married him. Nobody could be a pharaoh without the say-so of the actual great queen, who was always, even though she didn't maybe rule openly, but it was the prince had to marry the right woman, in other words, in order to even get to be pharaoh. And it was probably something similar, if not identical, in the Irish system. And even the word Tara, even though they try to say it's after Timez, it probably isn't. It's probably the old name of the most original goddess of Ireland, Ari, or Eri, from which Ireland is named. Yeah, exactly. So her name was Eri. Like, in fact, today, E-I-R-E, everyone knows is the name of Southern Ireland, Era, so that's her name. And the Tara is just a version of that, Tari, Terra, or like we use terra firma for the earth. Even when we use the word area to say this is an area, that word came from somewhere. It meant that word area originally comes from the name of the Irish goddess Eri, of the land, of the earth. So even the very word area, like the word terra in Latin, is all related to a goddess's name. You go to the Greeks, and their supreme goddess was Hera. And if you take the H off, which is always silent, you have Eri again. Her consort, right? Her consort, it might be son, but I think it was consort, is called Ares. That's where we get the god, the Greek god Ares, A-R-E-S. So we got Hera, and we got Ares in the Greek, just slightly different arrangement of the vowels. It's the same old Western gods and goddesses turning up in a more, a corrupted form later on. So Tara is the same thing. We even use the word Tara today to mean a girl's name. So,
Yeah.
and then the other interesting thing is that Newgrange particularly, because it's made up of 3 great mounds, Nath, Douth, and Newgrange itself, Brug na Boyne, if you were in a helicopter above it, it actually looks like the 3 spiral symbol, which is only found in Newgrange cairn. So there's a sort of a microcosm, macrocosm action happening there, because in the cairn itself, that means in the inner chamber of Newgrange tomb, people can go online and see this, there's those famous 3 interlocking spirals, but that is what is mapped topographically with the 3 external mounds. So it's like yin-yang, you know, they've got those 3 mounds representing the 3 spirals, and that alone, somebody would even say that represents the stars of Orion, and so on and so forth, just like they speculated that the pyramids, the 3 pyramids, represent the belt of Orion. I mean, there's people who also don't believe that, but nevertheless, these physical terrestrial structures were undoubtedly, I mean, Newgrange is a no-brainer since the sun still passes through the window of Newgrange, so nobody can doubt for a second, for an instant, that they were aligned to the constellations. So this is also an extremely important point about the connections that the ancients saw between the land of the goddess and the goddess of the sky, and that everything that happened was, that's why they build these stones, epiphallic stones, that's why we now have obelisks. These were, or even clock towers for that matter. The whole idea that there was a transmission of energy between the sky and the earth was central to these ancient people, as it still is to these Masonic people who have never forgotten any of this.
The Stone of Destiny, brought by the godlike people. Sitting on top of the king's seat of Timez, the hill of Tara, is the most famous of Tara's monuments, Ireland's ancient coronation stone, the Leofal, or Stone of Destiny, which was brought here, according to mythology, by the godlike people. Forgive my pronunciation, the Tuatha de Danann, as one of their sacred objects. It was said to roar when touched by the rightful king of Tara. It didn't actually roar for me. Danu and Bile, the primordial parents. All we have, and this is my own words now, all we have is 9th and 12th century references, books of conquest of Ireland. That's right away, we're reconstructed to suit each time, it seems, the books. How important are the names anyway? For someone like yourself, is finding similarities in each myth the way you build up a larger picture of the cataclysm?
Basically, that's all you've got. I mean, it is very important, because that is really all we have been left. So many books have been destroyed, just like the Incas and the Aztecs. Their books were, completely destroyed wholesale. This goes for every act of colonization. So you are handicapped, but you do have to then go with what does remain and try to put the pieces together. You just spoke of the god Baal. That's the same as Bel. Baal, Bel, Baltic, like the Baltic, where the Nordic people worship the same gods. So Bel just means beautiful one or fair one, obviously probably related to the sun. And his consort being Danu or Eri, you see, and then Bridget being the root of the word bride, so that when you have a bride today, or Saint Bridget, as the Catholics stole the ancient gods, Saint Andrew is borrowed from Indra, which is not just an Indian god, it's a Vedic Aryan god. Dennis, Saint Dennis, comes from previous deities, you see, Andrew, Matthew, like I said, County Meath, in which you find Tara, is a rendition of a goddess named Mayat.
That's where my family are from, actually. Kells.
Yeah, that's right. Kells, the city of Kells, the town of Kells. That's certainly connected to the goddess again, because the entire province there is named after the goddess of balance and the goddess of measurement, Maeve, Mother. And so no one can understand any of this without this enormous emphasis on the goddesses. The Nordic god in Scandinavia, they had the god Is, just pronounced I-S. That's Isis, the precursor. Right. The precursor to Isis, and that's how in Nordic countries you say the word ice, like like snow and ice. Ice is named after Is, a goddess. We have Donar, is the alternative name of Thor, and Odin, and then Odin is Adon. Just again, they change the vowels around based on pronunciation in different languages. So the Odin or Adon turns up as Adonis in Greece, and then lo and behold, it turns up as the Jewish Adonai, who then is the other name is Yahweh. So Yahweh, through the etymology, this meant to be exclusive God that has no connection to any other God. What a lot of nonsense, because the very term that they use for Yahweh, Adonai, one of Adon, is original is found is Odin in the Scandinavian myths. And in my book, we go into all those histories to show you that white men did in fact exist on the Nile as they existed in Korea. There's dolmens. Can you understand that? People have to understand that in China and even as far as Korea. I mean, we've got the photographs, and they weren't built in the 20th century. These are thousands of years old dolmens, exactly the same as you find in Ireland, in as far away as Korea and the China Tarim Basin. In India, you find round towers. In New Zealand, you have all of these symbols that turned up only in Western countries. In Africa, in southern France at the caves of Lascaux, the exact same wall paintings that they found there that are famous. They take school kids to look at it every year.
Yeah.
Those have now been discovered.
Years ago, yeah.
The exact same designs have been found in Egypt, dating to 15,000 years ago. They used to be considered unique to France. They are not unique to France anymore. Last year, top scholars found identical, and I mean identical in pigment, identical in iconography, in Egypt circa 15,000 years ago.
Yeah, fascinating. Danu and Bile, the primordial parents. Also widespread is the notion that Danu's consort is Bile, and that he is either the first male ancestor of both gods and mortals, and therefore a kind of lord of the dead, or that because of his name, which means tree, apparently, you can back this up, corroborate that, his name Bile means tree, which represents the world tree, that is the axis of the universe and any ritually consecrated area. I mean, you yourself, Michael, you yourself have a Trees of Life DVD coming out. Is there a connection with the Tree of Life and the genetic representation of a tree, as in the Virgin Atlantic symbolism? And also the eugenic symbol is a tree, the logo from the Second International Eugenics Conference in 1921.
That's right, no doubt about it. Just to finish off on Bile or Bel, you have Balder. It's a famous Scandinavian god. In fact, he was the beautiful one, the god of beauty, Balder, the young hero, the young Adonis. You have Danube, the Danube River. You have the tribe of Dan. You see this Dan or Danu or Dan or even Anna without the D. You have the Anna, which is another famous god. In fact, in most languages of the world, An, and this even goes through Sumerian, let alone Western languages, Anna means heavens. And then you have Annabelle. Remember the girl's name Annabelle? Right. Anna. And then in a church tower you have a bell to ring to God. You know, the bell that sounds that God is speaking is named a thing called a bell. You know, I mean, it just goes on and on and on, these connotations going back to these ancient gods' names. But yes, what you're talking about there, again, could you remind me, what was the latter part of your question there again?
The eugenics symbol.
Oh, yeah.
Of the tree.
Sure, certainly. I mean, the Tree of Life is ubiquitous. In every mythology, I don't care if you're talking about Kukulkan, or that's a feathered serpent, if you're talking about Odin hanging on the tree, Buddha sitting in front of the tree, Jesus being crowned with thorns and being crucified upon a tree, the oak trees that are mentioned in the book of Genesis. There's 3 trees mentioned in the book of Genesis, the most famous one being, of course, the Tree of Life, or the Tree of Good and Evil. You have tree references throughout the Bible. People are not familiar with it, but they're there. And
well, there was probably a lot more trees around in them days. You know, you could see how these relationships come along. You know.
Yeah. Well, you have the fig tree, the sycamore tree.
Yeah.
There's all sorts of tree symbolism in the Bible, as a matter of fact. And the connection to genetics is because. Yeah. Even today, the genealogists always talk about a thing called a tree of a family tree. So there's been some, and this happened because the very first writing that ever existed, and I don't care if it was in Norway or some other place, it used to be on leaves. That's why you even call the leaves of a book. So all genealogies, anything that had to be written down, was written on the leaves, and then they were tied up in bunches to represent the letters. And if you even want to send secret codes, the Druids used to send a bunch of leaves on a big string, and they'd bunch them up in 5s and 10s, and that used to give you what the secret code was. So the leaves of...
Yeah, carry on.
Oh, just the fact that markings, writings, keeping records was originally done on these leaves, ergo the tree. Don't forget that writing utensils like pens, early pens, were made out of birch wood and all of this kind of thing. And so the whole concept of a tree, of a family then, was a very obvious symbol connected to the fact that a tree grows in the same way that a man's family grows. There's a whole thing in my book about the tree of Jesse. It's a Christian motif about this character Jesse, who I think was the father of King David. His spawn, his tree, of genealogy was literally stylized as a tree. It doesn't go back to you don't even have to go back to the Druids. Just go and look at stained glass windows of Jesse, Jesse. Look it up on Wikipedia, the tree of Jesse, and there you'll have a whole Christian rendition of the same thing, that from the loins of Jesse, you see, came King David and all the line. So this has been done for years. And then we find out, as you move forward, it's fused with the serpent symbol, because the serpent symbol or dragon symbol, like the pen dragons, the head of the dragons, King Arthur, you have all this dragon symbolism predating Christianity, and I certainly do believe that is without doubt a symbol connected to genetics, because they're doing it themselves. The very geneticists, as you say, are using that very symbol on magazines, on their own individual logos, in their institutes, and then in these conferences that they put on. They're using this symbolism of the tree ubiquitously as a symbol of knowledge, but more specifically hidden knowledge, sacred knowledge, knowledge that they borrowed in thousands of years ago when they plagiarized the teachings of the Druids. And the very symbol for the very name that the Druids called themselves, Nadred, meant serpent.
Well, I remember you saying that Genesis itself was the gene of Isis, genetics, Isis.
Well, that came from David Wood. I didn't say that myself. An author called David Wood made that connection. It's an interesting one. It may have no meaning, but it certainly, you have these two words of the Isis and the generation of Isis, and it just happens to be the first book of the Bible. So, again, that's some verse looking into where these original words actually came from.
I thought it was fascinating the way, when you read the Bible, you mentioned that if a name comes up, like Adam or Job, it's best to think of them as a race, and then you get the full picture.
Yeah.
Can you expand on that?
Yes, in a lot of instances it's very important to, in my work, especially the book on astro theology, I go into all these ruses, and one of them is the transformation of an individual. When they were talking about a mass movement or a cult, they'll actually use an individual. Even more importantly than that is that they will perpetually use a title. And believe me, this goes for Jesus, Moses, Joseph, Solomon, David. Those are titles. And I'm probably one of the only people that actually even mention this, and I think it clears up a hell of a lot. The moment that you stop it doesn't mean that these individuals didn't exist, but that was not their name. A David was not one man. A David is many commanders, many kings. A Solomon is not just one pharaoh or one Israelite king. He's many. That's a title. There's examples of that today when you use the word Sir. S-I-R is a word going back to meaning the sun, Surya, and we have sire, a man who sires things. It can mean lion, it can mean son, and we use that word obligatorily to talk to anybody who has seniority, or lord, or master, or liege. These, in the same way in the ancient days, the David or the David was a commander, a Dawood, like you have in Welsh. And same for Solomon. It is incredible when you look at all of this. And in the Josephs, all of this stuff is to cover the real story. Moses, how many pharaohs were called Tuthmosis? I mean, it's unbelievable when you actually notice it. But because we've been conditioned, they put these before us as some sort of characters, and then tell you that the books of Moses were written by an individual, but then the very books that he's meant to have written talk about his death. Correct me if I'm wrong, but how can a dead man write the books in which the book is telling you, and he died? Well, he either wrote the book or he didn't. So then they'll admit, oh, no, we didn't mean an individual. We meant his sons wrote the book. Oh, wait a minute. But if 10 years before you said that, if I'd have come out and said the same thing, you would have had me burned at the stake. Now you admit, because you've been caught in a lie, that, oh no, it wasn't just he who wrote it. It could have been his descendants. Well, that's the same thing that the Mavericks have been saying for a long time. So they will, they'll always compromise when you finally catch them and put them into the corner. The word Bible itself